Tell me, wise one, if you were offered two paths, one across solid ground, full of stones and thorns, and the other across the smooth surface of water, reflecting a perfect sky, which would you choose? I would ask, the sage replied, where the second path leads. Nowhere. It's just a reflection. Then I choose the stones, for it is better to bloody my feet but reach a destination than to eternally glide over the surface of emptiness. Leonty didn't choose the stones. His path was paved with the gray, dreary asphalt of others' commands and his own compromises. He was a cartographer, but he drew not new lands but schematics for pipe laying under faceless city blocks. Each day his fingers glided over lifeless lines, the cold veins of a world he despised for its predictability. In the evenings he returned to his box-like apartment and gazed at the city he himself helped to suffocate with concrete. In this world there was no place for a reflected sky, only the dull gleam of streetlights on wet glass. He was a prisoner of geometry, a captive of right angles and precise calculations, and a longing for a different, uncharted world gnawed at him from within, like slow rust. This rust became almost palpable the evening he finished the schematic for a new residential district, a faceless hive for 20,000 souls. He drew the last line connecting the collector to the city's main artery, and felt something inside him finally break. It was the sound of a dead branch snapping under the immense weight of grayness. He didn't go home. He wandered the streets he himself had condemned to suffocation, and every manhole, every storm drain grate, precisely placed according to his blueprints, seemed like a tombstone on the grave of an unlived life. When he finally returned to his concrete cell, it was there. On his table, where only that morning lay a stack of tracing paper, stood a simple wooden box. Dark, almost black wood, without a single pattern, without a lock, without seams. It didn't reflect light, but seemed to absorb it. Leonty walked around it. No dust, no marks. It looked as if it had grown out of the very wood of the table. He touched it. The surface was smooth and cold, like a river stone. A gentle press, and the lid silently lifted. Inside there was neither velvet nor hidden compartments, just a smooth, motionless surface, like black water frozen in perfect calm. The disappointment was bitter. Someone's silly joke. He was about to close the lid, but his gaze was caught by the depth of this blackness. His thoughts involuntarily returned to the damned drawing, to its most hideous junction, a tangle of pipes under an unnamed intersection, where three branches converged at absurd, jarring angles. He hated this junction with all his soul. And at that very instant, a thin silver thread lit up on the dark surface of the box. It precisely, to the last curve, mirrored the contours of the hated tangle. Leonty recoiled. His heart pounded dully, like a clod of earth thrown into an empty well. He peered inside again. The lines glowed with a steady, cold light. This couldn't be. He closed his eyes, trying to ward off the illusion, but the image of the ugly junction stood before him. No, he thought with desperate clarity. This curve should be smoother. It should sweep aside, bypassing an imaginary foundation. Like this. He mentally drew a new, perfect line. When he opened his eyes, the silver thread in the box had changed. It curved exactly as he had just imagined, acquiring a stark, cold elegance. His breath caught. He was no longer a prisoner. He had become a master. For the rest of the evening and half the night, he sat over the box, like an ancient creator over primordial chaos. First, he corrected his own blueprints, perfecting the ugly schematics on the dark canvas. He straightened streets, widened squares, laid out gardens where his maps only showed concrete slabs. He made the world as it should have been, logical, pure, subservient to a single rational will. His will. This was not a sin. It was a restoration of justice. He wasn't destroying the old world, no. He was simply creating its ideal, flawless imprint alongside it. He was building his reflected sky, and unlike the one in the parable, his sky had solid ground. Upon waking for the first time, he didn't feel the usual heaviness of a gray morning. The world outside his window no longer weighed him down with its fixed nature. It was merely a draft, a rough template awaiting revisions. At work, he looked at his colleagues as walking sketches, outlines of people whose paths and destinies could be redrawn with a single thought. The power he felt was quiet and absolute. It was the knowledge of a stonemason who looks at a mountain and sees not a mere rock, but the future walls of a temple. The entire city, all this tangle of lives, became for him nothing but raw material. Temptation gained a name that very day. His name was Mark. an architect from the neighboring department, a man Leonty hated with a quiet, visceral hatred. Mark didn't draw communication schematics. He created spaces for life. His latest project was a pedestrian bridge over the old canal, a light, delicate structure of steel and glass, like a frozen flourish of a pen. The project was ingenious in its simplicity, and everyone knew it. When Mark showed the sketches at the general meeting, the hall was silent with admiration. Leonty, however, felt a cold, poisonous ivy of envy growing in his chest. This bridge was everything his life wasn't. Elegant, meaningful, aspiring upwards. It was offensively beautiful. That evening, Leonty didn't turn on the light. He sat before the box in the deepening twilight. He thought not of the bridge, but of its creator. Of Mark's self-satisfied smile, his effortless gait, how he so easily obtained what Leonty had fought for his entire life. The right to create, not merely to service. It was unfair. The world in which he was a god could not tolerate such blatant asymmetry. In his ideal blueprint, there was no place for random geniuses and their elegant anomalies. Order demanded balance. He closed his eyes and envisioned the bridge. Not a sketch, but its very essence, its structural soul. On the dark surface of the box, a silvery web immediately appeared, an exact imprint of its supporting arches and cables. It shone with purity and perfection. Leonty gazed at it for a long time, and in his eyes there was no admiration, only the cold concentration of a surgeon before an operation. He wasn't going to destroy this beauty. Destruction was crude and primitive. He intended to correct it, to introduce a single tiny adjustment that would render it impossible. He found the central node, the point where three main structural stresses converged. In Mark's flawless design, they balanced each other with the precision of a musical chord. Leonty mentally shifted the attachment point by just 2 degrees. It was almost imperceptible, like a false note in a resounding symphony. The silver thread in the box trembled and curved, obedient to his will. Perfection vanished. All that remained was an appearance, a flawless shell concealing the seed of catastrophe within its heart. The next day, confusion reigned in the office. Overnight, during the final computer modeling, a critical error was discovered in the bridge project. Unacceptable stress in the central node, which would inevitably lead to collapse within the first year of operation. No one could understand how it had happened. Mark stood at his desk, pale, crushed, sifting through blueprints that yesterday had been the object of his triumph, but today became a testament to his disgrace. He whispered something about sabotage, about a glitch, but the verdict was already evident in his colleague's eyes. Leonty walked past him without looking. Inside, there was neither gloating nor satisfaction, only silence. The silence of a perfectly calibrated mechanism in which the right gear clicked into place. He had not committed evil. He had eliminated a flaw. His reflected world became one step closer to becoming the sole reality, while the actual world became merely a fading echo at the bottom of the box. This shift in balance did not go unpunished. The world from which he drew power for his reflection began to thin. At first, it was almost imperceptible. The patterns on his room's wallpaper lost their complexity, turning into simple gray smudges. Sounds from outside merged into a single, faceless hum, devoid of individual voices and signals. People on the street became shadows, their faces, smooth ovals without wrinkles or distinguishing features. Reality lost details, as if an artist, tired of their painting, began carelessly erasing everything superfluous, leaving only a rough underpainting. Leonty barely noticed. All his attention, his entire essence, was now riveted to the box. The silver threads of his ideal world required constant maintenance. They weren't etched in stone. They were a living, trembling thought. And without his will, they dimmed, thinned, and threatened to unravel. He was no longer a creator enjoying his creation. He had become its slave. He sat over the box, and his mind, like a tireless weaver, passed over each line again and again, strengthening it, sustaining its cold luminescence. He no longer corrected the world. He desperately held his own world from disintegrating. It was work without rest and without purpose, save for itself. He maintained the geometry of streets, the purity of squares, the curves of non-existent rivers. He was a god condemned to eternally prop up the vaults of his empty sky. Gradually, he stopped getting up. His body, forgotten and useless, shriveled in the chair, becoming an appendage to a mind entirely immersed in the black surface. Hunger and thirst became distant, meaningless signals from the disintegrating world he had abandoned. He no longer thought of Mark, of justice, of his insignificant life. These concepts belonged to a reality full of flesh, blood, and stones. His reality consisted only of silver lines against a backdrop of absolute emptiness. He was a cartographer who had so hated drawing others' schematics, and now he was doomed to eternally draw his own, and these lines had neither beginning nor end. He didn't live in his perfect world. He was its eternal, sleepless mechanism. Tell me, teacher, what awaits one who chose the path across the smooth surface of water rather than the stones? He finds a world devoid of flaws, a world where every pattern is impeccable and every line is perfect. Does he then find peace within it? Only stones possess peace. He, however, becomes a line, and is condemned to eternally draw himself on the surface of emptiness, secretly praying for a stone to fly from the forgotten world and shatter that perfect surface.